You felt it before. That moment when you suddenly understood something about someone, maybe a friend, maybe a parent, and the understanding created distance instead of closeness. You saw them more clearly, and in that clarity, something broke. Most people assume that understanding brings connection, that if we could just see each other more clearly, we'd be closer. Intelligence as a bridge, consciousness as communion. Charlie Gordon proves the opposite. Charlie Gordon is a man with intellectual disability who undergoes experimental brain surgery to increase his intelligence. The procedure works. His IQ triples in months. He goes from barely literate to genius-level intellect. Then the effects reverse. He loses everything he gained and returns to where he started. But he remembers having been different. His story isn't about becoming smart. It's about what intelligence costs when it arrives all at once. What happens when you go from seeing almost nothing to seeing almost everything? When the veil lifts not gradually over years of experience, but in weeks, months. The result isn't connection, it's exile. Charlie moves through 3 forms of isolation. Before the experiment, he's isolated by not understanding. He thinks his coworkers are his friends because he can't read the cruelty in their laughter. After the experiment, he's isolated by understanding too much. He sees the cruelty and realizes he never had friends at all. And in his regression, he's isolated by having lost what he gained while retaining the memory of having had it. Here's what makes his story devastating. He never belongs, not once. Intelligence doesn't free him, it just changes which prison he's in. The question isn't whether he should have taken the experiment. The question is whether consciousness, real, full consciousness, is compatible with belonging at all. Before the surgery, Charlie works at a bakery. He has what he thinks are friends, Joe and Frank and the others. They laugh with him, include him, make him feel part of something. He's happy, genuinely happy. He doesn't know they're laughing at him. He doesn't understand that pulling a Charlie Gordon means doing something stupid. He can't read the performance in their kindness, the condescension in their patience. This is the first form of isolation, being alone without knowing it, connection as illusion, friendship as theater you can't recognize as theater. But here's what's crucial. This isn't simple ignorance. Charlie's isolation before the surgery is protected by his limitations. His cognitive boundaries create a kind of mercy. He lives inside a smaller world, and that world feels complete. He doesn't know what he's missing because the architecture of his mind makes certain kinds of pain invisible. This is the paradox that will define everything that follows. Limitation as protection, ignorance as shield. The boundaries of consciousness aren't just restrictions, they're structural mercy. And what happens when that mercy is removed artificially, all at once, is what makes Charlie's story more than just sad. It makes it architectural. Then comes the experiment, the surgery, the measured, documented climb in IQ points. And with it, something else climbs. His ability to read subtext, to notice patterns, to see what was always there but unreadable to him before. The lab reports track vocabulary growth, problem-solving speed, memory retention. They don't track the moment Charlie realizes his friends were never his friends. There's no test for that particular kind of comprehension, no chart for measuring when someone learns they've been the joke for years. This is where the structure inverts. Plato imagined prisoners in a cave, seeing only shadows on a wall. Then one escapes, sees the fire, sees the real objects, finally sees the sun itself, true reality. And when he returns to tell the others, they don't believe him. They can't. The light has made him unrecognizable. Charlie's journey moves in the opposite direction. He doesn't escape from darkness to light. He moves from comfortable shadow into painful illumination and discovers he can't return. Not because the others won't believe him, because the knowledge itself has changed what return would even mean. The prisoners in Plato's cave are isolated by ignorance. They don't know they're imprisoned. Charlie becomes isolated by knowledge. He knows exactly what he's lost, what he never had, what he can't get back. If you've experienced this in smaller ways, learning something about your family you wish you didn't know, understanding a friendship was one-sided, seeing through a relationship's surface to its mechanics, then you know the feeling. It's specific. It's not just sadness, it's architectural. The knowledge reorganizes how you stand in relation to the thing you understood. And some reorganizations can't be undone. Plato's escapee is changed by truth, but validated by it. He's seen reality. Charlie is changed by truth, but diminished by it, because what he sees is his own exclusion, now impossible to unsee. The cave offered community through shared blindness. The light offers only isolation. We've explored this before. Plato's cave inverted, enlightenment as wound rather than salvation. But Charlie makes it visceral. But back to Charlie. The story isn't finished.
Charlie keeps climbing. His IQ surpasses the researchers studying him. He starts correcting their methodology, spotting errors in their experimental design, seeing theoretical implications they've missed. He becomes, briefly, one of the most intelligent people alive. And he's never been more alone. He tries to maintain his relationship with Alice, his former teacher who encouraged him toward the experiment. But as his intelligence expands, his emotional capacity doesn't keep pace. He understands her motivations with clinical precision: guilt, pity, fascination. But he can't feel with her anymore. He dissects the relationship while he's inside it. She tries to reach him. He explains why her attempt reveals cognitive limitations she can't overcome. The conversation ends, not in anger, in impossibility. This is the peak paradox. The smarter Charlie becomes, the less he can connect with anyone. Not because people reject him, though some do, but because understanding has become a wall. He sees too much structure, too much mechanism. The spontaneous warmth that requires a kind of strategic blindness becomes inaccessible. At scientific conferences, he presents papers that colleagues half understand. They nod professionally, but he can tell, he can always tell now, that they're performing comprehension. The isolation isn't hostile, it's ontological. He exists in a different experiential space, and there's no bridge back. Then comes Algernon, the mouse who had the same surgery. The mouse who Charlie realizes with mounting horror is starting to regress, losing what was gained, forgetting what was learned. Algernon becomes a mirror, and what Charlie sees in that mirror is his own trajectory. Not hope, not success, just time. Time and biology, and the fact that the brain isn't meant to change this fast, this artificially. That what rises unnaturally will fall the same way. The third isolation arrives, knowing what's coming and being unable to stop it. Charlie doesn't just face intellectual decline, he faces it with the memory of what intelligence felt like, with the knowledge of everything he's about to lose, with the understanding, precise, scientific, undeniable, that he'll return to where he started, but changed. Because now he'll know what he doesn't know. Now he'll recognize his own limitations while being unable to transcend them. This is perhaps the cruelest form of exile, being conscious of your own unconsciousness, aware of your own shrinking awareness. The regression begins. Words he knew yesterday become inaccessible today. Concepts he mastered last week become foggy this week. He documents his own decline in progress reports that become simpler, shorter, more phonetically spelled as the pages accumulate. And through it all, one constant remains: he's still alone. If this resonates, if you've ever felt that understanding something changed your relationship to it forever, you're part of the small group who thinks about cost, not just clarity. Drop a comment, let me know.
The final progress report is short. Charlie's handwriting has deteriorated. His spelling has regressed. But there's one request, clear and heartbreaking. Please put flowers on Algernon's grave. Not for himself, for the mouse, for the creature who shared his trajectory and died without anyone caring, for the small intelligence that briefly expanded and then collapsed, unmarked and unmourned. It's recognition. Charlie sees in Algernon what others can't see in Charlie, the tragedy of consciousness that flares and fades, briefly touching something beyond itself before returning to darkness. He's asking that someone notice, that someone mark the passage, that someone acknowledge the small temporary light. And in that request is the whole architecture of his isolation made visible. Because who else would think to mourn a laboratory mouse? Who else would feel kinship with an animal whose intelligence was artificial, temporary, and ultimately futile? Only someone who knows, deeply, experientially, what it means to have your consciousness handed to you as an experiment, to be briefly elevated and then abandoned to your own diminishment, to understand that you were never the subject, you were always just the specimen. Charlie returns to the bakery. The co-workers who mocked him before welcome him back. Not with cruelty now, with something worse, with kindness that doesn't remember what happened, with a kind of institutional forgetting that erases the whole journey. And Charlie? He remembers. Not all of it, not the theoretical physics or the advanced mathematics, but enough. Enough to know he had something. Enough to know he lost it. Enough to recognize dimly that he went somewhere and came back, and that the coming back is its own kind of death.
Here's what Charlie Gordon reveals about consciousness. It might be a form of exile we don't usually notice because it happens gradually. Most of us never experience the accelerated version, the sudden leap from one form of awareness to another, then back. We grow into our intelligence slowly, over decades, and the isolation it brings feels normal, natural. We don't have a before state vivid enough to recognize what we've lost. But if you've ever felt that understanding people makes connecting with them harder, if you've ever noticed that seeing systems clearly makes participating in them feel impossible, if you've ever wished you could unknow something just to feel the warmth you felt before knowing it, then you're living a smaller version of Charlie's exile. The tragedy isn't that intelligence creates distance. The tragedy is that there's no going back. Once you've seen certain things, once you've understood certain patterns, the previous state isn't available anymore. Not really. You can't unknow what you know. You can only carry it. And maybe that's what consciousness is, not enlightenment, not transcendence, just the progressive accumulation of understandings that separate you from the world, even as they seem to bring you closer to truth. Charlie wanted to be smart so he could have friends, so he could belong, so he could finally be part of the world he watched from outside. What he discovered is that belonging requires a specific kind of blindness, and intelligence, real intelligence, makes that blindness impossible. So the question hangs there, unanswered and maybe unanswerable. If understanding means exile, if consciousness is the price of connection, if knowing clearly means belonging never again, would you still choose to know?